Welcome to the Bravosity. Welcome to episode 5 of the Choice Words podcast. I'm Brevon, and I'm here once again with Nathaniel.
What up?
And we're talking once again about RPGs. And as you probably know from the title, what we're talking about today is moral choice systems in RPGs. And specifically, unless we run out of stuff to talk about, we're going to be talking about binary morality systems, which is like made famous by BioWare with Knights of the Old Republic and up to Mass Effect, and everything they did but Dragon Age had the binary morality systems. But it was really popular around that time, like from Mass Effect 1 to 3. During that time, there was just so many games coming out that had binary morality systems. The Fable series, got the Fallout 3, and kind of New Vegas, but that's a story for another day. And just a lot of games at that point, even not like games that weren't RPGs, had binary morality systems. Infamous. There's plenty of games from that time period that had those, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. Nate, some binary morality systems from around the time of Mass Effect.
I was about to name off just about every single one that you already named off.
Most of them are good and evil, like the Fable, the Fallout 3 is a good and evil system, and most of BioWare stuff has been good and evil. Knights of the Old Republic was the good old Star Wars light side, dark side. And they tried to sort of move away from that good and evil, but they were still good and evil adjacent.
Yeah, Paragon and Renegade.
Yeah, and then in Jade Empire, which is the one thing they made in between Mass Effect 1 and KOTOR, had the Way of the Open Palm and the Way of the Closed Fist, which is basically just Paragon and Renegade. And yeah, we've seen it a lot. Fable had it, like I said, and that's another good and evil one. But we also had stuff like Far Cry 4 didn't really have a binary morality system, but you had that binary choice, like that same choice throughout the whole game of the two leaders.
Yeah,
that falls into binary morality
Yeah.
adjacent. Like it's not a binary morality system, but
both of them turn out to still be evil in the end. An evil outcome occurs no matter what choice you make. But you just practically get to choose what evil outcome occurs: child soldiers or religious execution.
It's more, it's like, yeah, the lesser of two evils, which became sort of more of a thing recently, I think, that we've seen. The whole binary morality system has fallen off for the most part. We still get some games like that. There was, what was that game where you're like a gerbil? You're like a little mutant, bio-mutant. That was kind of an RPG. It had like some good and evil choices, a little bit of a binary morality system, but that game kind of sucked. But so we're talking about the good and the bad binary morality systems. Ha ha ha, there's a little pun. So comparing them to games without morality systems, like Dragon Age Origins compared to Mass Effect, or Fallout New Vegas compared to Fallout 3, although it's still got system. It doesn't really use it. And then we can also look at something like Fallout 4 versus Fallout 3.
I just thought about another game that has a binary morality system.
Right, throw it on top.
Isn't it like Cultivate? Something like that? It's
Cultivate.
It's the one where you're like a monk or something, then you gotta make your whole own religious sect.
Cultivation Simulator.
Cultivation Simulator, my bad.
That's like very far from what we're talking about.
No, it has a binary morality system.
It's got a lot more going on than that.
You go kill somebody, that's considered evil. But if you, like, for no reason kill somebody, that's an evil action. But then if you give them a proper burial afterwards, it's a good enough action to set you at breaking even.
And that's sort of a good place to start with binary morality systems. In a lot of games, it is either doing the like most extreme good or extreme bad. Like, here's a baby in danger. I'm either gonna save it or kick it like a football, or like, like that's the kind of things that we're dealing with. I'm either gonna, I might nuke this entire city for no reason other than money.
I was thinking.
I guess that is a reason, but
it's just like nuke an entire town,
make a couple $1,000.
Don't nuke an entire town.
yeah, that's a pretty good example of the negatives of it, but also the positives. I mean, it is very fun to blow up an entire town with a nuclear bomb. I mean, that's some of the kind of fantasies that we want to have in games like that. But at the same time, it really shatters any thematic strength the game could have in its story. As we're talking about RPGs mainly.
Or immersion in some cases. If the choices get too ridiculous and out of place within the story, which some of them do, it kind of does shatter immersion. Like Fallout 3, as soon as you get out of the vault, you go by Megaton generally, most people do, and you're just gonna go there and immediately choose, hey, you know what? I'm just gonna blow up an entire town for a
I
little bit
mean,
of money
I mean, it
without
does give
understanding
you
anything about this world yet.
it does give you the opportunity to be a complete asshole in the vault as well, though. So I mean,
Yeah,
as far as immersion goes, I don't know if that necessarily is breaking immersion, but
but being like a bully in the vault to being an outright psychotic
yeah,
murderer, mass murderer at that,
yeah,
is pretty big leap.
yeah, that's true. Wasn't the best thing to put at the beginning of the game,
Yeah,
because with most of these systems, you do want,
build up
yeah,
to
you
the
want
big evil and good choices.
yes, you want in. I mean, with any story in any game, you want that escalation as you go through the game. You want to
Yeah,
become, you want to go from saving grandmas that are getting their purses stolen to saving the world or whatever. You don't have to go that far with it.
yeah,
I like a lot of games that have smaller scale stories, but that's the kind of thing you want. Like in Knights of the Old Republic, you can do some horrible, horrible things when you become Sith and like just torturing people and just horrible things. Um, but at the beginning, you're just like robbing people and doing petty stuff. I mean, that's just story arc. I
yeah.
mean, that's just how it goes.
But really, having a whole arc that goes along with the morality is a great idea for writing. Like, as you get worse, the choices get to where you can do worse, or the other way around. I mean, it kind of doesn't work completely with the other way around, since most people are apprehensive naturally to do terrible evil, but
But
are
if you
going to
have that
step
nice
up to do really
escalation,
good. Yeah, but yeah, it's better for writing to have that the escalation.
and you could still
Escalation, my
the folding table.
bad.
Um, Another thing though about the binary morality system is sometimes it allows you a lot of the time it allows you to just like flip on a dime, and I mean that's something you have to worry about with putting in any sort of choice system is you can lose the character of the protagonist. Like they're making one choice 1 minute and they're making another choice another minute, and that's sort of that. I mean, that's on the player too for making that decision, but they're giving them the ability to make that decision, to be crazy and basically like to make completely different decisions that don't really make sense when you look at the last decisions you made or the character that you have. But it can also strengthen that character. A binary morality system can, because without any type of morality system, then yeah, you're just choosing random things and going in whatever direction you want. Whereas with the morality system, you can get two focused directions, three if you're gonna have like a neutral in between. You can get different focused directions for their characters, like a renegade shepherd and a paragon shepherd are two decently different places.
Yeah. Usually the outcomes tend to be the same, but the like I don't know, it mainly affects the speech checks in Mass Effect and what he says specifically, but usually doesn't affect your rewards too much for missions. Unless you do some outright stupid where you just kill somebody for no real reason.
I mean, but there's more impactful things like the genophage and large
Yeah.
story impacts. And like you said, things end up relatively the same. The destination is relatively the same, but the journey to the destination is what changes.
It's especially more like that, I think, in the third game, since those choices can affect who's siding with you and everything. But in the second game and the first game, the main story still plays out about the same no matter how you go about it. It's just conversations in between change, usually. or if you want to have Rex survive or something like that.
And that's one thing I will say.
Spoiler alert.
That's one thing I will say about Knights of the Old Republic and Jade Empire is a good and evil playthrough in Jade Empire and Knights of the Old Republic are vastly different. Um, like murdering companions and doing all that stuff, and I think that's because they were focused a little bit less on having good graphics and action combat systems and having saves transfer from one game to another was a big thing that ended up having to axe off a lot of choices or a lot of consequences to your choices. Whereas in Knights of the Old Republic, they were only worried about single game, and there's uh, some of the pigeonholing, like sending you on a path, and that's where you're gonna go. But a lot of the time, you get to do some crazy stuff, and you have two vastly different endings where you either you either let the Jedi or the Sith win, as you could probably imagine.
I just thought of a good way that a game could really make it to where you can't just change on a dime. Say, like, you've made evil decisions the whole game, and that, like, slider practically that the game has kept track of. Say it has a range of decisions you can make around where you're actually at. And now you're faced with a decision where you can do an outright good thing, but it's out of the range of where you're allowed to act within. So you can't just switch on a dime and do something really good unless you backtrack through other evil decisions to be less evil.
That's sort of what the Paragon Renegade system does to a much lesser degree.
That one's more of two separate sliders moving up next to each other, and if you get one to like top out, then you can make every single decision within the game that is affected by that.
But a lot of the time, to top one out, you can't top the other one out, and so you're locked out of those good decisions, or bad decisions. Paragon Renegade, whatever. And I mean, we see that same thing in Knights of the Old Republic. You get evil points, you get good points, then you get some unique options you can choose depending on those points. And then another thing that a lot of games do, including Knights of the Old Republic, is you get bonuses to certain attacks and abilities depending on your points. And that's a pretty cool thing to do. Knights of the Old Republic, if you get light side points, your healing, force healing does more, your force push is stronger, and then if you're evil, you got your lightning does more and your chokes do more and stuff like that. And that's another way that these binary morality systems can change a game, is not just in the narrative but affecting the gameplay, which can be really interesting.
Yeah, that is actually, and it fits within the whole lore with Knights of the Old Republic, especially because it's supposed to be all a mind thing on how powerful your force is.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a really, really good choice.
There's also stuff like, locking certain companions away depending on your side of the morality. We see that in Fallout 3. But I think that's just the biggest benefit to a binary morality system. It's when making an RPG, when making a choice-based game, every choice takes a lot of resources, Like every path takes a decent amount of resources. Voice acting, if the game's voiced, writing, level design, whatever. And then the bigger the choice, the bigger the consequences, the more you're gonna have to design. And I think that's one reason we see binary morality choices, because making two paths that are very distinct from each other is a lot easier than making a bunch of different paths. And a lot of newer games that have tried to get away from the binary morality systems, like Cyberpunk, Skyrim doesn't have a binary morality system. That's not new. That's not really a good.
It doesn't really have a whole lot of different long scale
consequences.
Yeah, consequences.
And that's what I was gonna say.
Short term, like you get this reward, or you lose the reward. That barely happens though in Skyrim because they don't have the balls
to make you go down a path. And we see the same thing somewhat in Cyberpunk. It does it better than Skyrim at giving you more options and choices, but each playthrough feels very much like the last playthrough. You're not getting extremely distinct paths. But there are games that have done that, like Dragon Age Origins, Fallout New Vegas. It's just clearly much more difficult to make more than two distinct paths.
Yeah.
And there are, as we've discussed, there are benefits to having those two distinct paths. Good and evil is obviously the simplest way to go.
Yeah. Though it usually leads to, at least in my opinion, that leads to generally kind of poor writing if the binary is based on only good and evil and nothing else, rather than like moral philosophy. It's only those two choices.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't really make a lot of sense to turn on a dime when it comes to that. But in other situations, if it's not good and evil, usually the two within the binary are better at certain scenarios. So you might use some moral philosophy for one scenario and a different one for another scenario.
And it
makes more sense to do that than just be, I'm going to just murder this dude for no reason, but then I'm going to give their money to this poor old woman.
And you always have the chance of that in, player-driven, choice-driven games. And I think even with, which we haven't seen too many games that do the binary morality system that isn't just good and evil, or some variation of that. The closest thing we've seen to getting away from that is like Paragon Renegade, which is slightly different, and then you've got like authoritarian, libertarian stuff in some games. Right, anarchist versus authoritarian. Yeah, and
I want to see communist versus capitalist.
And I mean, even thinking about it, even as we discuss it, I think the binary morality system itself is just shallow thematically. Even if you take two, a yin and a yang of any kind and try to do something more nuanced than good and evil, like not really Paragon and Renegade, but that's what they were attempting to do with Paragon Renegade, or do authoritarian, libertarian. The fact that you've only got these two opposing ideas just makes it lose nuance, because I think that it's best explored when you can go through the middle of these ideas, or just think of more than two extremes.
Well, I just thought of a kind of good instance that would be a bit more nuanced is take the ethical philosophies, one being like utilitarian, utilitarian.
Yeah.
My bad. Utilitarian, and I can't remember the actual name of the other one, but it's more about
egalitarian
liberties. Yeah, egalitarian. Say you take those two. Egalitarian, it fits as a
right. It wasn't exactly what you were talking about.
That's not really a moral philosophy, but more of a governmental setup or class system setup. But you could technically say utilitarian could be also. Well, say those two are the opposing ones. Where, say, one's focusing more on personal liberties, not really on the group. The other one's focusing on the group and not personal liberties. And your goal still is to be the good guy, but you have to use different methods to be the good guy using these two. And that one can actually be way less shallow, because that's one of the biggest questions people are having today, really, on how the world should be set up, is whether the group as a whole needs to be focused on, or the personal, single person, individual needs to be focused on. And that one would be a good, more moral binary.
Yeah.
But you'd still need to make a focus to the game that sets you on a, either you're trying to do something really good, and you just use these methods to do so.
Like we were talking about with even good and evil, you need that build up, so you can choose, from both, and maybe have more in-betweens in the early game. Whereas, the binaries go more extreme as the game goes along. You start to lose those in-betweens. That would be interesting.
I'm going to put this factory in the hands of the people. And then the other one's just, nah, this guy who has a lot of money is going to invest in this factory and buy it.
And then, maybe at the beginning you were like just trying to, like, you had to decide, do we want to try to get more hours or less hours? And or
Yeah.
like you have smaller choices in the early game that.
But like, say more hours has more productivity and benefits the whole because of the importance of whatever is being made, but it's hurting the individual workers. That's one
But
way to think
see,
about it. But then less hours not benefiting the whole, but making the individual workers happier.
so you're saying the binary morality systems would be better if both sides had positives and negatives.
Yeah. Whereas it's not just an outright, I'm going to do something evil just to make some money, or I'm going to do something good just because I feel obligated because I want to do something good.
Yeah.
Instead, make it to where the entire goal of the game is to do something, whether that be evil or good, and your methods to get there have positives and negatives each.
I think in
Like,
in a game like that, you would want the idea to be doing the best thing possible.
yeah, in the scenario we were talking about, especially with needing to choose something that say helps the group as a whole. But yeah, I think it usually would just have to come down to moral philosophies rather than just outright good and evil for morality systems to be good within the themes and the writing. Because really, you could show the problems with actual ethical frameworks within real life through a video game if you can show some of the problems if you make certain choices and the benefits if you make certain choices. And maybe you could help people respect both ethical frameworks in a way.
And I think that is like, yeah, that is like the ideal thing that a game can do. It doesn't use a binary morality system, but that's what Disco Elysium really did for me. It made me question my own political and philosophical beliefs and look at other political and philosophical beliefs in a different light and have a different understanding of them. And I think you could do that with a binary morality system. It's just a lot more difficult. And I think that, like we said, this is what Mass Effect was trying to do,
Yeah.
but there wasn't enough negatives to being a Paragon. I think that's the biggest problem. Like,
Yeah, because being a hard ass to get things done sounds like a good trade off would occur from the other side, but you still get things done just as easily if you go with the other
yeah, so there's like
side's view.
so there's basically no point in being like an asshole about it.
Yeah.
Like, we're gonna get it done. Why do you got to be a dick about it? There's not
Yeah.
really any point.
It's just
Whereas
because it's funny when he outright insults people.
it is, but it just would have been more interesting and a better argument or like debate if they would have had more negatives to the Paragon.
Yeah.
Like, you lose a lot of companions, or
Say things
there's
just
all
don't
kinds,
work out
right.
right, but then you just piss everyone off if you choose the other direction.
Right, and you still want positives on both. You still want, the player to feel like they've been somewhat victorious, at the end, or that they've gone on a journey. But there should be negatives to
So you
both
just
sides.
have to play way better if you want to be a good guy and still have the best possible ending. You just have to play way better and make better decisions that aren't necessarily moral, like your strategic decisions.
And see, that's a bit of a different argument that I think, like the idea of pass fail mechanics in an RPG. And I think that's a discussion for another day. I think that's a whole separate discussion from
But I think you need
moral
to
choice
update
systems.
the pass fail mechanics if you made one, uh, like in the case of Paragon Renegade, if you made it to where you could only get certain things done going Renegade, and that's the trade off, and that actually makes you not get the best possible ending, then make it to where the pass fail mechanics would need to be updated in a certain way to where if you just play outright way better, that you can still get certain things done. It's just much harder.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
That could definitely be interesting.
It would just make it to where you didn't take the easy way out by being an asshole and making everyone step in line practically.
So, do you want to see binary morality systems in the future?
I'd like to see a few of them, but I would definitely like to see less just outright good or evil. Though I'm still fine with there being a few of them out there because that does make a pretty fun type of mechanic. Even if it doesn't really work thematically all the time, it's still fun. But I would think it would be cooler to see something that's more than just one choice or the other. Though we talked about how that's really difficult to make because it takes a lot of resources. But it would be cool to see one that has like maybe three or maybe even four or five different ethical frameworks in a way to where you like move closer to one, but you can be in between multiple.
This sort of reminds me of in Exile, that's developer in Exile game, tactical RPG. Not really tactical, but it's isometric. Torment, Tides Numenera, which that name's a whole mouthful. But great game, wonderfully written. I would love to do a review on it sometime. I probably will, but that's one of them games that like I don't even feel qualified to talk about because it's so well written. Like Disco Elysium is another one.
You need to play through it about 20 times just to make sure that
Right,
you
and
don't
then
miss something.
go get a language arts degree, and but that game has like 7 different. It's the tides they call them, and it's 7 different moral philosophy directions, and it tells you your dominant tide, and each choice it tells you which tides you're putting into, and that's a really interesting system. And the 7 different philosophical directions allows it to have a lot more nuance than a binary system. But in the end, it really didn't affect very much. That was the problem. People didn't talk to you about your tide or anything like that. It was just a personal thing that you knew about, which was fine. It was fine as just a marking of the choices I had been making.
Yeah. Especially if you're making those choices, thinking about what you would do in real life, and then seeing what you end up as. Turns out your trade off is that you are an absolute psychopath, but at the same time, you do one little redeemable thing within that tide. That'd be kind of funny. But um, it would be cool though if a game could do this and still have enough outcomes that are different, but it would be very difficult, especially for 7 different uh, frameworks. But if you could drop it to like 3, I could see someone actually doing it and getting that done well.
That's
But it
sort
would
of
take a
what
lot of work.
Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition do. There's some other stuff they do, but you've got like it's basically like angry, happy, diplomatic, intimidate. Those are the same two.
Yeah.
Diplomatic, intimidate. Then the middle one's like goofy and like sarcastic most of the time.
But that's like,
Not very nuanced.
yeah, that's not really nuanced. Diplomatic and aggressive could be nuanced if the third, because it would be like the Paragon Renegade.
Yeah.
But if the third option was something else that was more nuanced,
And
then
not
you
just
could
an
make
in between.
diplomatic and aggressive.
I think that's key to doing the 3 or multiple as well. You don't want 2 sides of a coin and then an in between.
Yeah,
You want
just a
3.
non-neutral.
Yeah, you want 3 neutral ideas.
3, like separate, very separate.
Yes.
Like, say you have the militaristic, diplomatic, and
Capitalistic.
I don't know. I think that's not. I don't think that's a thing for being different than those.
I mean,
Because that's more diplomatic. Because you don't want to piss off the people you sell to.
true.
Capitalist would try to be full diplomacy and sell to everyone all at once.
True.
But at the same time, you're not going to be nice and not fuck over somebody if you think it would gain you money if you go full evil capitalist.
And that's why I think militaristic versus diplomatic, that's just back into that Paragon Renegade good and evil
I think
almost.
you could do militaristic without being outright evil.
But where's that third one that's separate?
Conflict is good.
That's what I'm trying to say. You need something different than just militaristic diplomatic.
Those I'm not entirely sure, but I'm sure somebody could figure out something to throw in there that is more nuanced
If we
without
could,
being just a neutral.
we'd probably have a bunch of money if we could.
Well, we haven't even thought about it for very long. But
Yeah.
like, if you could come up with three that are actually separate and each one is nuanced, then I really do think that it would be an interesting game.
So what you're saying is,
And I think it's possible if it's something that's only like three to have quite a few different outcomes. But if you had more, it would probably need to be like a really basic game, not with probably voice acting, and
it just depends on your
where it's
resources.
easier to make maps. Well, even if a big company wanted to do it, unless they wanted to make a shorter game with vastly different outcomes,
Yeah.
then you would probably need to make a game that uses less complex resources, where it's easier to build new levels.
So what you're saying is you believe in separate but equal. That's what you're saying?
Mean?
Is that what you're saying?
I'm not talking about races.
You believe in separate but equal. Oh, when it comes
to moral
to moral philosophies
philosophies
in video and
ethical
RPGs.
frameworks.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Don't be trying to paint me that way on
Oh,
the
I'm
internet.
sorry.
Come
I'm
on.
sorry. So I think that having, these different philosophies in your RPG is a good thing, rather than just coming up with random choices for each decision for each part of the game. Like
Skyrim.
Yeah, and some more open RPGs.
Yeah.
Cyberpunk does it a little bit. There isn't really any philosophy in each of the dialogue options you're given.
Just, are you dirty corpo, or are you a desert warrior?
And see, that's not really in there. That would be nice if it was in there. And that does sort of, anarchist versus corporatist does sort of end up being the opposing philosophies, but it's not very well strung through the entire experience, in my opinion. And I would say The Witcher 3 is an example of doing that well. There's not like three opposing philosophies throughout the entirety of Witcher 3. There's lots of singular choices. And still, through those singular choices, you feel like you make an impact and you have a very different experience because of those.
Yeah. Well, his goal in the end of the game is generally still about the same.
Yeah.
In many of the Witcher games. So it's something that I think is easier in that instance.
That's the thing. In The Witcher 3, his philosophy is the same no matter what choices you make.
Yeah. It's just your methods of getting it done.
And it's your interpretation of his philosophy as well. Because you can have vastly completely different kingdoms can control the world.
I accidentally let the crones eat all the children. I didn't even know
Spoilers.
I was making that choice. Spoilers for a game that's years old.
Yeah,
now.
That choice is hidden decently, which is another interesting thing we can talk about. Is
where you don't know if you're doing something good, bad, or any of the versions of their moral scaling.
I think that is better than something like the Paragon Renegade, where your good and evil actions are like highlighted with a color.
Yeah.
To where it's like, this is the option for this side, this is the option for this side. It's better to...
But you said tides also tells you what tide you're playing
after you make the choice.
Okay.
And I think that's better. Not knowing what specific philosophy this choice is. Not just picking the color that you like over and over again,
Yeah,
this is my color. This is my color. I'm a gold tide, so I'm just going to keep picking the gold options.
Yeah.
But instead forming your philosophy through your choices that you make.
Yeah. Get to know yourself a bit better.
Yeah.
Make it to where every moral decision is the trolley problem. With different variations of the trolley problem.
And record each of your decisions, even if it's in the background. And then you can create an arc out of that as you send the character into more extreme versions of each of those. And, as the player starts to get to that extreme, they could be like, well, shit, I don't know if I'm liking this as I'm going farther. I'm going to pull that back and put a little bit of white in my gold, a little bit of red in my silver, whatever. So we're sort of saying the same things now. I think we have been a little bit. But I think we've really gotten into our ideas on this and what we think about it. So I want to ask. We sort of got into this already earlier. To keep this going for a little bit longer, let's come up with some binary or trinary morality systems here. Come on, we got this.
Okay.
We had utilitarian versus.
I know we said egalitarian, but it's not really egalitarian. That's not the opposite of utilitarian. But I can't remember what the ethical framework is. I think everybody is probably able to assume the opposite of utilitarian a little bit, though.
Okay.
The fact you're not focused on the group, whereas you're focused on individual liberties.
But there's a nice in between in. But then that's another in between. But in tides, there's the gold tide, which is you care about the smaller group, you care about your family, whereas utilitarian is caring about the entire everything.
Yes,
somewhat. So that's an interesting idea, and then you could have full on selfishness as a third one, but that's another one where it's one side, another side, and an in between.
Well, selfishness won't be an in between.
No, the gold one is the in between. The caring about the smaller group. That's the in between of selfishness and then caring, and then utilitarianism. I mean, utilitarianism can be selfishness.
I don't know. You see, caring about the smaller group, you could add some kind of. This isn't necessarily bad in the way that I'm referring to it, but you could add some xenophobic type of things added to it where you're still not like a completely selfish person, but you just think you need to look after your own first.
Yeah.
You could still make it distinct from being just an outright neutral, but it would take better writing. It couldn't be a very easy thing to write. Don't be misinterpreting my words on how I said it's not necessarily a terrible thing within the ethical frameworks.
Yeah.
Because the tribalism,
Right.
How we bring it up somehow in just about everything.
Check out what is it? The "What Does War Never Changes" means.
Yeah,
for the origins
you'll hear us
of that.
talk about tribalism for an hour straight.
More. I talked about earlier, or we've been talking about how having two extremes and then a middle isn't that great, in my opinion, for a morality system.
Yeah.
And they don't technically have a morality system in this, but the Outer Worlds is one prime example of where that doesn't work for me. Like I said, in the Outer Worlds, you have full-on corporatists and specific kinds of corporations, conglomerations in the Outer Worlds, and then you have full-on libertarianism, and then you have an in-between.
Is there even a benefit to being full-on corporatist in that game?
You make a lot of money.
Okay, so only selfishness. It's not like a benefit for society.
Yes. The in-between is basically siding with the company that isn't just like
evil.
Yeah, or changing some of the smaller companies to be better companies. And at least for me, the in-between always seems like the right answer, like the obviously right answer. And not just me, most people who I've talked to who have played it, and most people I've seen online who have played that in-between section. And
having some in-between, it all depends on how it's done.
Yeah.
If you get to that in-between ending and you practically, nothing's really happened because you didn't go one way or the other, then that's usually bad writing. But if you can show the positives and negatives of both sides and then end up in an in-between, and that is the perfect area because there is positives and there is negatives, then I think that ends up helping broaden someone's perspective.
I don't know. I think when looking at that in-between, making the in-between the perfect answer is the more flawed option, because taking the two opposite sides, if you're gonna include an in-between, then you might as well not even include the two opposite sides, because why pick either of those sides if you have a clear in-between that's clearly correct, which is what the Outer Worlds ends up doing.
It's kind of along the lines of why would you ever even play the evil side in a lot of games? When you're thinking about what is correct and gives the best possible outcome for everybody, why would you ever be an evil person?
Well, that's in the good.
Because it's partially fun.
Yeah, yes, and that's what I'm saying. In the good and evil games, I don't see. You're not picking what is the right answer, but in a morally gray,
yeah, in a game that's
morality
trying to
system,
be nuanced,
like Mass Effect, even though it fails miserably, um, a lot of the time in Mass Effect, you can be thinking about what is the right decision, especially in 1 and 2, and before we knew how it was going to end.
It just locks you out, though, of the best possible decisions you can make at the very end of the game if you keep trying to do both sides the entire game.
Yeah, and the Renegade doesn't feel satisfying enough to me. You don't lose it. There's not enough wrong with the Paragon for the Renegade option to feel.
I don't know, when you get the
reasonable
option to punch the newscaster in the
Yeah.
face, that's
And
just
that's
like,
another one where
now.
it's a good time. It could definitely be a good time to be a asshole or evil. Um, but I think in a morally gray morality system, you're better off being binary than having a neutral option that's clearly correct. But if you add enough nuance to it, you can make that neutral option and the two extremes all feel reasonable.
Yeah.
You can make that neutral option without making it the right option.
I think having the in between, though, it depends on what both sides are, for one. Because sometimes there is a side that is, in general, better than the other side. But usually a little bit of a mix between tends to be the best option when we're not talking about just outright good and evil. Now, you could make it to where being perfectly in the middle is terrible, but being completely one way or the other still doesn't present the best outcome.
That reminds me of Disco Elysium, where if you play a centrist, it just like berates you the entire time for not believing in anything.
Oh yeah, you just don't stand for a single thing.
Yeah, that's what it's like. You're just you believe in changing nothing and keeping the status quo, and that's a clever way of making that
But
neutral option.
what if you actually agree with the status quo?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's where it becomes. It's not the correct answer necessarily, but it can be,
Yeah.
and so can each side of the binary morality system or the multi-sided morality system, whatever. But I think overall that it can be very good to keep track of players' moral decisions and give them points or whatever to allow their moral decisions to have consequences.
Yeah. Throughout this conversation, have you come up with another uh group of moral system? Like no, you haven't?
No,
How
we could
about
just uh
here's one that's relevant right now. Right versus left.
yeah, talk all about it in the comments.
Yeah, make sure to talk all about it. You know what?
Yes.
If you argue and produce more comments, that only would help us in the end by having more web traffic.
Yeah. We just want all of our comments sections to turn into heated political arguments.
Yeah, so that then we just make sure, and maybe new people just jump in, not even for the video,
Yeah,
just to argue.
Yeah, just for the political arguments.
Yeah, get us more web traffic, please.
Yeah.
But pacifism versus militarism, but that tends to generally be portrayed as good and evil. But I really think there's ways you could play it to where if you're a pacifist, you just get walked on and die, and
Right.
everybody you know gets destroyed.
But
you can being too militarist, you end up destroying yourself in a way.
And I think for both, like we talked about, you could have like you talked about, making it harder.
Yeah,
a pacifist
where you
run.
can still win.
Right.
But it's just really difficult. Stellaris does an interesting thing with the binaries, because when you're forming a government, you could choose authoritarian versus, I think egalitarian is the opposite of authoritarian. Maybe. I'm not entirely sure if I remember that right. But if you choose one, you cannot choose the other. And they both give bonuses, but now you're losing the bonus of the other one. Another one's militaristic versus pacifism, materialist versus spiritualist. They have all sorts of interesting things, and you can combine non-opposites though.
That could work in an RPG. But the only thing is choosing all of those at the beginning
Yeah.
could really
Well,
lock you into
Stellaris
something.
isn't like, an
Yeah,
RPG.
yeah.
But making that to where those are the choices could be interesting, and where you technically aren't doing, say, like, you're a militarist, but you're a spiritualist.
So you could have multiple binaries.
Yeah, that are working alongside each other.
That could be interesting.
And having different combinations could give you different outcomes.
Mass Effect Andromeda does something a little like that, where you have logic, and you have like two, like there's four in total, but most of the time there's four philosophies, moral ideas, or just the way you do things. But most of the time, you're only choosing between two of them, like logical or spiritual. I have no idea what they are. It's not very well done in that game,
Within a
but it's an interesting
game,
idea.
I think that within a sci-fi game,
I don't think spiritual was on there.
Yeah, I think logical would only be the right option in any sci-fi.
There was like
game,
logical, diplomatic, and something else.
Just go full on militarist.
I think that might have been one, but it's an interesting way to do things, and I think that idea of multiple binaries is another interesting way to go about it, rather than a trinary, quadrinary morality system.
Quintuplinary.
What is seven? Centuple?
Yeah.
Century?
No.
Century? Let's just have a century morality system. Just 100 different moral philosophies.
I don't think that many even exist on Earth, to be honest.
You know what the best morality system is in an RPG? It's not in. I don't. It might be in some video games. D&D. D&D's morality system is one of the best.
Just, are you lawful evil? Are you lawful good? Are you just a chaotic neutral? You do anything but on spontaneousness.
It's just good to have that smorgasbord of moral opinions.
How would you even be lawful evil unless you exist within an
authoritarian
area that is, like, inherently evil? Yeah, authoritarian.
It's just extreme authoritarian, basically.
Yeah, it's just like, the only way you can really utilize a lawful evil is if you live within, like, an outright fascist or dictatorship type country.
Or
within the game.
What if you're just like a neo-Nazi?
You're trying to build one? Oh my gosh. You know what idea sucks in a lot of games? The moral philosophy. And this is something that was in Cyberpunk that you mentioned earlier.
Oh, let's hear it.
Corporatism versus anarchism.
That's just... And that really starts to fall back into just the good and evil...
but
militarist versus...
That binary is so, like... For one, overused, not necessarily in video games only, but within movies and shows, and it always ends up having full-on, outright, like, well, almost always. I don't know necessarily how much Cyberpunk does it, but outright, there is no moral good within one of the two sides.
Yeah, no, Cyberpunk does it in a relatively nuanced way. It's both seem to have their positives.
Cyberpunk, I mean, they also have an entire area of the city where it's all anarchy, and you see that that's a bad thing if you just drive through it for a second.
Johnny represents anarchy through the whole game, and he's a complete asshole.
Yeah, he's still cool though.
He is, but I did not get along with him at all in my playthrough.
It's like, you gotta have some rules, or people just be killing each other for no reason.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, what's weird is corporatism isn't the opposite of anarchy in the first place.
It's when the corporatism becomes authoritarian.
When it is the government.
Right.
But that's an obviously bad thing. In real life, everyone knows the idea of having a business run the whole country in real life is a bad idea.
Yeah.
Like, if we let Tesla right now, no matter what your views are on how good
oh my gosh, we're going to get the Muskie boys in our comments section.
I don't dislike Elon Musk, but no matter what, you have to admit it would leave an opportunity for big corruption.
the Muskie boys will follow. Would definitely love if Elon Musk
I
was.
actually like Elon Musk. I think the problem is with corporatism in a lot of games is they do make the corporations governments, so they're almost always evil because of that. Because like it's inherently like the setting they're put in makes them inherently evil because they run a government and are a corporation.
I think,
Whereas corporatism in real life is a way more nuanced topic, and I think it could have an interesting discussion within a video game.
and I think one thing Cyberpunk does well with that is that most of the world isn't completely ran by these companies. Well, actually, no, most of the world is ran by the companies, but Night City is somewhat independent. Like, it's still corrupted completely by the companies, but the companies don't run the government. Neither Militech or Arasaka run the Night City government. They have their own independent government, which is corrupt and has been bought out a bunch by the corporations, but they're not actually ran by the corporations. Whereas the actual like new United States and Japan are ran by the fucking corporations.
I like Arasaka as an idea because the Arasaka was a real gun produced by a company in Japan in World War II, and he's coming from that company, right? Well, isn't he the guy who made the Arasaka then?
I don't know. I know he fought in World War II.
Well, he probably made the rifle. That'd be kind of interesting.
It wasn't even his real name. He just
historical callback.
Yeah, that is interesting. Another thing is with its themes, Johnny and his anarchism. It's not necessarily about having no rules forever. It's just about the fact that he wants to burn down the status quo. So he believes that he has to rip all this down before he can rebuild.
Okay, so like Marxists in real life.
I mean, yeah, but sometimes I can.
The system is flawed. We have to tear it all down.
I mean, and I can see.
Marxist is gonna hop in the comments, be like, "That's misrepresenting my ideology."
But I could see the reasonability behind that. I could see the idea behind that. That you have to, looking at the people who founded our country, you have to throw away, cast off the shackles of.
It depends.
Imperialism. Whatever. I don't remember exactly what it says. Cast off the shackles of something.
You know what? Have imperialism. That's how mankind runs in the first place.
Well,
big guy with a bigger stick always wins. Takes the stuff from the little guy.
But the little guy,
the guy with the littler stick.
But the crowd of little guys eventually gets upset and they fight back. And
and then they take over that guy.
And then the little guys become the big guys, and then start to
manipulate. Continues. Yeah. It's just the way of history. It's sad. Make imperialism part of the moral frameworks. Imperialism on one side. Isolationism on the other side.
Isn't that just the authoritarianism?
No, imperialism is like, fuck those guys. Not my own people, but those guys. Those can be whoever you choose. And then this starts to become more like xenophobe versus xenophile.
That still
actually
starts to lead into the authoritarianism.
Imperialism versus isolationism is actually two xenophobic ideologies just going through different methods.
That could be an interesting idea, like you were talking about earlier. Instead of taking two
opposites,
instead of taking two ideas that are morally gray but trying to be the good thing, you take two opposite ideas that are both completely evil and psychopathic. Couldn't that be an interesting idea? Take two horrible ideas,
it's just like
but they're still opposing.
One guy likes to torture his victims. The other guy likes the efficiency of just taking them out immediately. So, two psychopaths trying to decide whose tactics are better.
No, one psychopath trying to decide which side of himself.
He's just like, do I want to take the pleasure in taking them out or just have more victims?
And there's non-RPGs that have done not this evil. There are some that have done stuff like this, But if you look at something like another game is Dishonored, which does something pretty interesting as well. It has a relatively I think it's an invisible morality system where like it tells you that it's going on, but it doesn't tell you exactly what level you've attained on it, where you're
Yeah.
at. And it's about how many people you kill because there's a plague. It's a stealth game. It's a
Yeah.
immersive sim is what they call it technically, because it's like Deus Ex. It's half stealth, half action kind of RPG. But the more people, there's a plague in the city with all these rats and turning people like into zombies. And the more people you kill, the worse the city gets, and the more dishonorable your character is. And that's a pretty well done system because it's much harder to play the game without killing people. And so that's one of those where the worse you play, the worse shit that happens. The better you play, the better shit that happens. But, or, the better outcomes you get. But murdering people can also be extremely fun in Dishonored.
Just
And
a couple of psychopaths talking about how fun it is to murder people in video games.
they do some morally questionable things with some of the good paths, though, because there's assassination missions you have to do, and some of the non-lethal ways of getting rid of the people are like extremely messed up. Like this lady has like a stalker who's like a creep, and the non-lethal way is to tie her up and give her to the stalker, and he just like drives away with her on a boat.
That's even eviler than just
Yeah,
outright killing
yeah.
her.
There's a lot of
You should kill her and the stalker.
but and see, it's not the place isn't getting worse because you're making evil decisions necessarily. It's getting worse because you're killing people and those bodies are attracting rats and creating the plague. So it's not even necessarily a morality system, but it works like a morality system. It's all based on how good you play, how stealthy you play, how little people you kill.
That's interesting. I haven't actually played Dishonored, but I've only heard a little bit about it. I knew it was a stealth action type game, but I actually didn't know that there was a hidden morality system within it. That's actually a really interesting way of doing it. I think that we've come up with pretty good conclusions as a whole. Like we we would like to see more nuanced versions of it instead of just good and evil, but some good and evil ones should stay around because they are fun.
Especially in goofy games like Fable or
Yeah.
I wouldn't like to see it in a Fallout game, but Fallout 3, the tone of that game really fits the good and evil system, even though I don't particularly
You're just walking
care for
around.
the
Let
good
me
and
go
evil
and
system.
slave these children real quick
Yeah,
from Little Lamplight.
it's pretty great, to be honest.
You know that should be a choice in any possible future Fallouts. Make something that has some balls like that, but at the same time, make it to where it's not just out of the blue. You just walk up and it's just like, hey, you want to go slave some children real quick?
Now we're slaving.
But I also think, yeah, we talked about how there should be more than just two options in some games in the future, but how difficult that can be to make a video game like that, but how it could actually show more interesting perspectives into overall society and within the player themselves and their own morality.
This has been a good conversation. Thanks for watching and listening to the Choice Words podcast. Check out some of our other videos on the Brevosity. Check out our other choice words. Check out some of our game reviews, some of our analysis videos, top fives if you like me and Nate talking. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the Brevosity, see more stuff like this, and hit the bell to get notifications, and join our Discord if you want to see cool memes and talk about videos that you want us to make. And yeah.